going to look like when we come in the classroom. Okay. So, what I'm hoping to do for this first hour of this PLC is to really delve into cortical visual impairment and vision loss. And this is really geared towards, because the 3 kiddos who are in kindergarten, Stan, Johan, the 3 of these guys all have cortical visual impairment. So I thought, why not just do a big PLC so everybody can learn about CVI, because it's quite complex. A lot of times I feel like we hear, you know, it's more of a brain issue and affects their vision, but there's a lot more to kind of go into it. So if you're here and you happen to work with Paulie as well, you're going to get some information because he also has cortical visual impairment. His is a little bit higher, but we'll get into this in a second. Okay, so what is CVI? What CVI basically is where it's vision loss due to some type of brain damage, and it's going to really impact how our kiddos use their vision. So if you can imagine, it's basically where our eyes oftentimes are healthy, but the problem is with our brain processing it. So it's where our eyes could take a picture, imagine, but our brains can't understand what the picture is that our eyes took. Does that make sense? So oftentimes eyes are healthy, but our brain cannot make sense of what we're seeing. So we like to say it's basically a brain problem, but it presents itself visually. And with CVI, CVI can really occur at any time. It can happen before kiddos are born, it can happen during birth, and it can also happen if you're 27 years old and get into a motorcycle accident and you have brain damage. It can happen at any point in your life. Okay? So CVI is the leading cause of visual impairment in a lot of our kiddos. And this is just because back in the day, our little ones would pass away. We're having more and more improved medical care, so our kids are staying alive a lot longer, so we're seeing the occurrence of CVI happen a lot more than what we ever did. So that's why I'm sure for you guys who've been around, you're starting to notice many kids have CVI. CVI can coexist with other forms of visual impairment. So this one we're going to get into a little bit. Remember how I mentioned our eyes can take that clear picture? Well, in our 3 kiddos, they're not even great at taking that clear picture. So we'll get into that. Okay, so we're just going to start. We're going to go one by one, and I'm going to explain our 3 kiddos in K-2 and explain what's going on with them specifically, visually. So with Stan, all of these guys have CVI, but Stan also has bilateral optic atrophy. And we're not going to go really in depth to that, but that basically means that there's some type of damage or degeneration to his optic nerve. And you can see here it says a +2. It normally goes from 1 to 4, 1 being the very worst. So you can imagine he's kind of right in the middle. This really does affect, aside from his CVI, this really impacts how he uses his vision. It can impact colors that you're seeing, and it can also impact just the quality of how well you see. He also has bilateral esotropia, and I think you guys all know this. Bilateral means both eyes. So both of his eyes, he has esotropia, which is an inward turning of his eyes. So you'll probably notice when you do work with him that you'll see his eyes kind of deviate inward towards his nose a little bit. And that, in essence, means that his eyes are not working together, which is a big problem, because that is how our brain gets information about what we're seeing. So, with Jaden, and then right down here at the bottom, Stan does not have glasses. So if you're looking for him, no glasses. He used to have them when he was a baby, and they basically saw no improvements and didn't think that he was getting a lot from them, so he does not have them anymore. Jaden has what's called bilateral ptosis. And what that is essentially just droopy eyelids. So his eyelids kind of come down a little bit. So how this impacts him is that he misses a lot of things in his upper field. So if Jaden is here on the floor and you're up here and you're trying to talk to him, 9 times out of 10 he's not going to see you. He might see that your feet are here. And
which student is that?
Jaden. But yeah, so for him it's worse in his left eye. He has it in his right eye, but his left side is a lot more impacted. He is also nearsighted in both eyes. So Jaden sees things better when they're close up to him. when they're further away, he has a bit harder time seeing them. Jaden has glasses, so his glasses are going to help in this. They're going to help to accommodate. So when things are further away, when he has his glasses on, it's going to help him see things a little bit further in the distance.
Can you also like do a big picture?
Yes.
Close up?
You can. Yeah, you can, but you have to be careful because if you imagine a huge picture and then it's going to be right up here in his face, he's probably only going to see a small detail of whatever is in front of him. So just because they're nearsighted, enlarging things doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to see it better. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay, he also has esotropia, same thing as Stan, where his eyes deviate inward. Let me just make sure. Sorry. On you guys' handout, I'm so sorry, there was a typo. It said in his right eye, but I corrected it on here. It's his left eye where he has it. So his left eye turns in, and then what the Duane syndrome basically just means is that he has a hard time getting his eyeball to go outside.
Quick question, so you're talking about Stan
We've moved on to Jaden.
Jaden.
Okay. Everybody.
Yeah, we haven't
so
talked about
we're on
Jaden.
Jaden right now, not yet on Johan. Okay, so Jaden, right here in the middle, he also has
Oh, ignore me. I'm having a side conversation. But
I want to say it's okay to discuss the kid. That's why I was asking to hold for a minute so you guys can see specifically how it relates to the kid you work with.
Okay. So the last one for Jaden is that he also has something called Mitotic Pupils, which are abnormally small pupils. And what our pupils do is basically they expand and they contract and they allow light in. So with Jaden, his pupils are very small all the time. So you might see if you're in a bit of a darker room or say it's a rainy day and you don't have the lights on and it's a little bit darker, he might have a hard time seeing. So using a spotlight might be a good thing for him, and we'll talk about accommodations a little bit later. You don't always need it. If he's in a bright classroom like this, he won't have a hard time seeing an object that's right in front of him. Just if it's in a darker environment, he might have a hard time seeing. Okay? Moving on to Johan. This guy also has bilateral ptosis. This, again, is where he has the droopy eyelids. And I think, if asking me, I think Johan's is a little bit more severe than Jaden's. He's a guy who doesn't see a whole lot in his upper field. You'll even see Johan, sometimes he'll tilt his head back. And I think that's because he's trying to see what's in his upper field. So if you notice that, it's because he's trying to get more visual information about what's in his upper field that he can't see. Okay? Bilateral esotropia, again, is that inward turning of his eyes. So his is very worse in his left eye. He also has nystagmus, and his is horizontal. So these are just very rapid eye movements where your eyes are just kind of going back and forth. And I don't see it present a whole lot in Johan, but just be aware at times where he might be trying to focus a little bit more, or if he's tired, you might see the nystagmus happening a little bit more. Okay? Strabismic Amblyopia. Basically what this one is, this is in his left eye. If we have one eye that's stronger than another and it's working a lot harder, so in Johan's case, his is in his left eye. So his right eye is his strong eye. So what's happening is his right eye is working a lot harder to be able to see, and his brain in turn almost shuts off. If there's not great information coming into that left eye, his brain's going to say, I'm not going to use it. I'm just going to put all my attention into this right eye, which in turn is going to be a big problem because he's not going to use his vision and he could go blind in that eye. So what happens to treat this is something called patching, and you guys have probably seen where some kids wear it's a patch that goes over their eye. So you put it on the stronger eye. So Johan gets patched on his right eye, and that's forcing his weaker eye to really use and get those muscles stronger. So to the best of my knowledge, he does not get patched here at school anymore. They used to do an hour at home and an hour here at school. but I think the family said they were just gonna take over, so they do both hours a day at home. So it's nothing that you have to be aware of here at, well, you know, keep it in the back of your mind, but you won't have to do it here at school. Johan is also farsighted, so he naturally sees better further than what he does up close. And again, his glasses, he does wear glasses, are gonna help with that. They're gonna help to accommodate things, so he can see things at near. You know how sometimes when you're older sometimes, how you have to hold things at a distance to be able to see them? This naturally might happen for Johan, but when he wears his glasses, he's gonna be able to see things a little bit closer. And
I have
then
a question.
Mhm.
If he takes off his glasses, if he gets something close, he can see
It'll
it
be
or not?
blurry. It'll be blurry. If it's something that's close to him and he's farsighted, he's not gonna be able to see it clear. If you hold it back a little bit, he will be able to see better, but his glasses will help to accommodate.
Do you have a distance that we should?
I don't. I think it's about 12 inches or so. It's not too far in the distance, maybe 12 to 15 inches or so. But like I said, when his glasses are on, you're good holding it within, 10 to 12 inches of the space.
I worked with them last year, so just a side comment. Both Jaden and Johan wear their glasses pretty well for most times. Sometimes they'll need visual breaks, and Aaron will probably go into that later. But just so you guys know, you probably won't have to worry about without their glasses on too often, because in general, the boys do wear their glasses pretty well.
Another
My
question.
question, yeah, like around specials time, Johan has been like taking his glasses off and
Mhm.
like all afternoon he kind of needs more breaks in the afternoon, so.
I got it. That's it. Yeah, and both of these guys are really good about letting you know when they need a break. Jaden will take his glasses off. Johan will push them up on his face or on his forehead sometimes. I would recommend that anytime you see them doing that you honor what they're trying to communicate to you. That you say, oh, I see you're pushing your glasses up. Do you want to break for a little bit? Even if it's just a 3-minute, 4-minute break, and then trying to present it to them again. I wouldn't take them off and leave them off then for the rest of the day, but I would give them a break and then try to present them within a couple minutes later. And have them put them back on. Okay?
I remember last year or 2 years ago, I was with Polly in a
Israel.
Israel, sorry, and I took him for a vision test, and I realized that how they were testing his vision, how did it match? Because like we can respond, we see the the fuzziness or the clear, but with this student, how did the doctor decide that the kid knew what he was looking at? How does he know?
What they do is, when you go to the doctor and they dilate your pupils, and then they can look back in the back of your eye, they do this with our little ones. And what they do is they shine a light in there and they hold up different, Claire, what's this called? When they hold up the different prescriptions, basically.
Are they lenses?
Yes, that's the word I'm looking for. Thank you. Lenses. Lenses. They hold up a lens and they hold it against the child's. Right. And so what they do is they hold it up to his eye and they shine a light in his eye and they look at how the light reflects back. If it's a short where it comes from, it's nearsighted, I think, and if it reflects back in the back of their eye, it means they're nearsighted. But they basically just keep bringing lenses out, different lens, and see where the light is reflecting. So it's nothing that our kids have to answer, like with us, where we say A or B sees better, or 1 or 2, or where we can see the letters in afar. The kids really don't have to be able to answer, that they can still tell if they're farsighted or nearsighted. It's pretty amazing. It's not the most incredibly accurate read, but it's a start.
Thank you. So all the kids have the equal eyes are the same, or
Yeah.
one's better than the other, one's worse than the other?
Well, we just discussed which eyes are better than the other, but as far as being nearsighted and farsighted, it does apply to both of their eyes. They're equal. It's not one eye is farsighted and one eye is nearsighted. It's a bilateral.
Okay.
Okay. Any questions regarding their optical issues? Okay, so into CVI. So how do you know if a kiddo has CVI? You look at basically the combination of three different things. You look at, do they have a normal eye exam? Oftentimes families will bring their kiddos into the doctors and, the doctor might say, oh, they're farsighted. And that does not explain why their kiddo is appearing blind or why they have a normal eye exam or an eye exam that doesn't explain the profound lack of vision, okay? The second is some type of a neurological or brain trauma. Every single one of our kiddos who have CVI either have had a brain bleed, they've had brain issues with the white matter of their brain, they might just have a brain malformation, but anybody who has CVI has some type of brain trauma. And then lastly is there's the presence of 10 different behavioral characteristics. And this is what we'll get into in just a second, but this is really, when you assess a kiddo who has CVI, there's these 10 areas that you really look at to see if they have it. Okay, I'm just going to fly through this because we don't have a whole lot of time to work on this. But kiddos with CVI, especially infants, between that really important phase, we call it the critical window for brain plasticity, is between the ages of birth to 3. So this is an imperative time for kids to get working on their vision and get accommodations and interventions in place. The great thing about CVI is that it can get better. Rarely does it ever stay the same. So with CVI, and because our brains are so amazing and they're constantly changing and growing and rewiring, we can expect change. So we used to think the critical period was between birth to 3. Like if things happen after 3, we weren't going to have a whole lot of luck. But research is going on and on and on and showing that kids now, brain plasticity happens all the way up until, at least they're thinking into the 20s now. So no amount of time is too late to start using interventions and accommodations with these kids. Okay. In older kiddos with CVI, we, again, like I said, we don't know brain plasticity-wise how late it goes. So we can still expect to see change. We just don't know how quick it might happen in our kiddos. I think it's definitely going to happen a lot quicker in those younger ages. Okay, so with CVI, these are just a couple little tidbits here. Kids may or may not have cognitive delays. So don't think that just because a kiddo is deafblind or has significant disabilities that they have CVI. You can have kids have CVI and have no other problems, no other delays. With CVI, faces may not be recognized. So if our little ones aren't making eye contact with you, it might not necessarily be because they're autistic. It could be because they have cortical visual impairment, and looking at faces is an extremely hard, complex task for kids with visual processing needs. Okay. Let me see. Behaviors are always changing. We kind of just talked about that. And oftentimes with CVI, objects and people are embedded into the environment. So this is why I love to use this visual here, a Where's Waldo puzzle. So oftentimes if you're asking a little one to find an object or find a toy or look at a piece of paper that you have, and it's in a very busy room, so this is actually a great room, it's not that busy, but say, you were asking a kiddo to find this Mr. Potato Head right here. This could be what we consider a very complex background because there's multiple colors, there's multiple patterns, there's multiple objects all around. We would say it's very visually cluttered. So having them find that item amongst that background is going to be very hard. It's like finding Waldo in a Where's Waldo puzzle. Does that make sense? Okay, so when we do an assessment on kiddos with CVI, they get a score. And I'm going to delve into this. So if you guys can just jot this down or just try to remember, when they get a score, there's 3 different phases. Phase 1, Phase 2, and Phase 3. Phase 1 is the most severe, and Phase 3 is more mild. Phase 2 is right in the middle, a little bit moderate. And this is how the kiddos are going to be using their vision. So the phase is more the broad level of how they're functioning, and then the range kind of gives you a little bit more specific information about how they're using their vision. So these are the 3 boys, their scores, and we'll get into this in a second. But if you can imagine, the range goes from 1 to 10. if this is, sorry if this is a little bit confusing. You can see right down here at 0 is where there's no visual functioning. A lot of these kids, may appear like they're blind. All the way up to 10, and this is where kiddos can have CVI, that they could be looking at faces, they could be looking at pictures. They're doing pretty much a lot of the same thing that you and I would do, okay? So phase 1 goes from, actually, I'm gonna jump ahead, but I just wanna show you. This is where this S is right here is for Stan, the JA is for Jaden, and the JO is for Johan. So you can see kind of where they are at functionally using their vision. For Stan, his CVI impacts him a lot more than it does the other two guys. They're using their vision a lot more. Okay? All right, so this is just general, and this is kind of what I was just explaining. There are 3 different phases. So when you look at that scale of 1 to 10, if you have a range between 0 to 3, you're in phase 1. And the goal of this phase, really, when we're working with these kiddos, we are just trying to basically get them to look at an item. We're trying to get them to consistently look at an object, more stable visual responses. So I'll just give you an example. How this looks is sometimes we do where we hold up an item, and these kiddos might not even look at the item. You might present it, we might be in a dark room, lights out, have a toy that has a light component to it, and they might just shift their eyes just very, very briefly for like 1 or 2 seconds. And what we're doing in this phase is just trying to get them to look at that item a little bit more consistently and a little bit longer. Like Stan, he looks at an item primarily for about 2 to 3 seconds. If it's a good day, he might be able to sustain gaze on something for up to about 5 seconds. So
On something, stand for what, for more than the 2 seconds?
he might be able to sustain gaze
Sorry, I missed it.
for about 2 to 3 seconds. A great day would be about 5 seconds for him. Okay, so phase 2, if you look again at that scale, it goes from 3 to 7, and this is where Stan and Jaden are. But I'm going to tell you, Stan is at the very, very beginning of phase 2. So we're almost at the very end of phase 1, beginning of phase 2. So we're still trying to work on getting consistent visual responses from him. Jaden is at the very end of phase 2, so he's using his vision a lot more. I would say that Jaden and Johan are very similar in how they use their vision. At phase 2, the goal with CVI is just starting to use your vision with function. So an example of what this might look like is, like with Stan right now, we're trying to get him to look at his spoon before he eats. So Stan has a preferred visual color, and it is blue. He tends to see blue, so we try to incorporate that into his daily routine. So we're trying to get him to look at his spoon before he does a skill. We'll get more into depth in this. Phase 3, this is where Johan is. He's at the very beginning of phase 3. And what this is basically, there's 10 different behavioral characteristics that I talked about. This is working on the last ones that still affect the kiddo. Okay, sorry. And I'm not going to go too deep into here. Like I said, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, these are the more general areas. If you want to look specifically at what we're working on with each kiddo, I have them labeled of where they are. So you guys can go back and look at this on your own time. This is going to be one that we're going to spend a little bit of time on, so get ready. Okay, when we do a CVI assessment, we look at these 10 different areas. If you have a kiddo who's in phase 1 and CVI really impacts them, they are going to present probably with all 10 of these characteristics. As you get higher and higher in phase 2 and phase 3, all 10 of these areas might not affect the kiddo, okay? So, with kids who have CVI, they oftentimes have a distinct color preference. A lot of times, if you're more on the phase 1 end of things, you can really only see maybe one color, maybe 2 colors, but to see all the colors you most likely won't. So Stan, for example, has a pretty preferred visual color. He sees blue and he sees gold. These are his big ones. He's getting better and better, and with all 3 of these guys, we're getting ready to update their CVI assessments, so this might not have been the most perfect time, but those are the 2 colors for Stan. For Johan, he really prefers red and yellow. Johan, however, he can see all the other colors. He just really has a preference for red and yellow. And red is something that really grabs Jaden's attention too. But you often see kids have a preference for red and yellow. For kids with CVI, these are the big colors that they respond to.
Red and yellow.
Red and yellow. Yeah. It's pretty amazing. In our brains, if we don't even have a visual cortex, the part of our brains that processes visual information, our brainstem can still process the color red, which is incredible to think. No brain, the part of your brain that controls vision, nothing. But we can still see the color red. So if we have a kiddo who doesn't have a preference, we tend to just do red anyways. The second is the attraction to, or the need for movement. Oftentimes kids, if you just present an object, they might not be able to see it unless it has some type of a movement quality. So it's going to feel silly, but if you have a piece of paper that you want them to look at, if you kind of wiggle the piece of paper, it might help them to see it a little bit better. And this could apply for anything. In addition to, they can also be distracted by movement. So if you have, Johan and Jaden here, and they're trying to look at something, but in the background you have kids running around or a staff member walking back and forth, they're going to look at wherever the movement is coming from, because that's what they're drawn to, is the movement. So just be mindful wherever they're positioned that they're going to tune into whatever's moving. So if you have a door opening and somebody's coming in and out, they're going to really be drawn towards that movement. The next area is the need for light gazing, and the non-purposeful gaze. A lot of times these kiddos really respond and they need light. So you notice that a lot of these kids, all their toys that they play with, a lot of materials that they use have some type of a light up component to it, or a shiny component. I forgot to mention with movement that when you add things that are shiny to it, whether it's like Mylar, like balloon paper, whether it's anything shiny, their brain is going to interpret it as movement. So that's often a good accommodation for them. If you notice they're not looking at something, to add a shiny property to it. Okay? Back to light gazing. A lot of these little ones are going to be drawn towards wherever the light is. I could say, I want to say for Johan, it probably impacts him the most. I've seen him kind of get distracted by looking at the windows. I've seen him look at the overhead lights sometimes. So just be mindful with these little ones that wherever the bright light is coming from, they're probably going to get distracted. So positioning them with their back to the windows or back to a bright light. Even just these lights right over here, you might not think that they're too bright, but our kiddos are going to be drawn to them. There's also a non-purposeful gaze, still right here with light. Sometimes we hear people say, well, I can't really tell what they're looking at, or it looks like they're looking at me, but it looks like they're looking right through me. I can't really tell. This is a non-purposeful gaze, and I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen this with our little ones. And this is a characteristic. Again, if they're more in phase 1 or in the lower areas, this is going to impact them more, and as they get higher and higher, you might not see it happen as much. The next area is visual field preferences. Number 4. A lot of our kiddos, what happens is when our vision develops, our peripheral fields, these side fields, they develop first. And then comes our central field. And this is where we get the most detailed information. This is where we can see really big details. Our peripheral information gives us awareness of more movements and things like that, but central is really where we get that detailed information. So a lot of our little ones have the peripheral, but they don't have the central yet. So just be mindful in that. And we'll talk to it in a second about their specific visual fields. A lot of times kids with CVI have a lower visual field loss. This doesn't go across the board, but it's very common for them to have a visual field loss. So just be mindful of that. Difficulties with visual complexity. This last one, this is what we were just kind of mentioning about the busyness of things. And this kind of looks at a whole bunch of different things. We can have the complexity of an object. So if you think about a toy that you want a kiddo to look at, or a handout, whether it's a paper or whatever, think about how many colors does it have on it? How many patterns does it have on it? How many, like if you think about a worksheet, if I wanted them to look at this would be very complex. So what I might want to do is fold it so they only see this top half, or block out part. Just get them to look at the most essential part that you want them to look at. If you think about a toy, that lights up, they have to reach out and activate it. There's music going on at the same time. This is another aspect of complexity. How many different senses you want them to use. So sometimes you'll see Jaden will do this. Jaden and Johan will do this sometimes, where if they're playing with a toy that lights up and they're reaching out for it and they're trying to watch it at the same time, you might see that while the music is going off, they turn their head away. And then as soon as the sound stops, then they turn back and they look at it. It's because it's too complex for them to look and listen at the same time. So just be mindful that if you see a kiddo turning away, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not interested. It just might mean that the activity that you're doing is too complex and their body is working too hard. So you might have to just kind of factor out using one sense at a time. Let me think, what else? We already talked about faces. Okay, we'll jump over to visual latency. This is a delay or wait time. So with our kiddos with CDI, oftentimes they will not look at things right away. They might need a little period of processing time and wait time to visually look. You'll also see that sometimes after they've been using their vision a little bit more and more, then they can respond quicker. It's almost like they need a period of warm-up time, and then as soon as they warm up, then they can start using their vision a little bit. But so don't be surprised if you present something and they don't immediately turn and look. This is major for Stan. He will need some wait time, and Johan as well. I would say Johan a little bit more than Jaden. Just position it there. Don't try to get them to track and move it back and forth, because the more you move it, the longer it's going to take them to find what you want them to. Hold it right in one position. You might add a little movement to it and wait for them to look. Okay? The next area is difficulties with distance viewing. And this could be, it could be a matter of inches, it could be a matter of feet, but oftentimes kids with CDI have a hard time seeing things further in the distance. Our next area is an absent or atypical visual reflex, and I won't go into depth on this, but basically we have two different blink reflexes that we all have. One is a blink to touch, so if I walked up to you and I touched you in between your eyes, your natural response would be to blink. Same thing with our second one is a blink to threat. If something comes at your eyes very quickly, whether it's a hand or whether it's a paper, your body's natural inclination is to blink to protect yourself. A lot of times with CDI, because this is a brain and a processing issue, our kids don't have that reflex. So if something comes at their eyes really quick, they will not process it and their eyes will stay right open. So this is another indicator of how severe their CDI might be. It doesn't necessarily mean it's absent, it just might mean that it's delayed. And the last area is an absent, basically it's our eye-hand coordination. A lot of times kids with CDI have a hard time coordinating, looking at something, and then maintaining looking at it and reaching at the same time. You'll often see kiddos, Johan and Jaden both do this, where they might look at something and then they might have to turn away, and then you see them reach for it. They don't use their vision with it at the same time. And what you'll see oftentimes that with objects, it's a lot easier because they're three-dimensional and they're larger. It's easier for them to look and reach. But when you start doing things with photographs and pictures, things that are more two-dimensional and flat, it's a lot harder for them to coordinate looking and reaching. So this is where both of our little guys are, Jaden and Johan. Oh, you say I did. I skipped visual novelty. So novelty, as you guys know, is the newness of things. This is where oftentimes our kids are really good. They have the same materials, the same toys, the same routine. They need that. But when you try to introduce a brand new picture to them, or you try to introduce a brand new object, they might have a hard time using their vision. And this isn't just objects. This relates to people. They might have a hard time visually seeing new people. Being in new environments can be really hard for them to use their vision. So with our little ones, beginning of the school year, new staff, new materials, new classrooms, just be mindful that they might not use their vision right now how they normally would, just because novelty is a problem. And this is why we often get very cautious when people are like, oh yeah, let's just make pictures of everything. We're like, wait. If the kid hasn't had an experience with it, if they don't know what it is, let's hold off until they actually get some hands-on time with different objects and routines. Any questions on that right yet? Okay. So like I said, those are the 10 different areas that when we're doing an assessment, we test all 10 of those areas. And most times with all those kiddos, they're gonna have areas where they present in all 10 of those. So this is why during IEP meetings, you guys see pages and pages of accommodations. It's because we're accommodating for all 10 of those different areas. So I'm going to skip through these, but basically what I did on these next couple slides, this is phase 1. So these are what typical behaviors look like in phase 1. So if there's a day where you get a new kiddo who has CVI and they say, oh yeah, think about a phase 1, you can go right back to this and read these different behaviors, and this will kind of give you an idea of what their visual functioning looks like. Okay? So I did this on this part right here. I put Stan's name, so if you guys want to go back and look later, this is round about how he's visually functioning. Same thing with Jaden and Johan. I put them right here so you can kind of, get out of here for these little ones. Okay, so those 10 different areas that we were just talking about, they can get better, and some of them can resolve over time. The thing with CVI is that it's never going to 100% completely resolve and get better. You will always have some degree of an area that impacts you with CVI. Some of the first things to resolve as they start using their vision better and better, light gazing won't be as much of a problem. You won't see that non-purposeful gaze anymore. All the way down to these are going to be some of the very last things that resolve. Visual field, kids will tend to always have some type of visual field loss. Visual motor, that looking and reaching, that's really hard to resolve with our kiddos. Complexity, again, the busyness of objects and backgrounds and environments, this is going to be an area that we'll probably accommodate for a long time. And distance viewing. These are going to be the hardest ones to kind of get rid of, so to speak. Okay, but with appropriate supports, these kiddos can use their vision, and they can essentially find Waldo, okay? But all of them, what's going to really depend on them using their vision are the accommodations that we put in place. If they get here to school and they don't have any of the accommodations, they're not going to be able to use their vision, and there's a good chance that their vision won't get better. And I should also mention with CVI, it can get better and better, and it can also get worse and worse. And we'll talk about this later, but there's a lot of different things that impact how kids use their vision. So if they get sick, if they're not feeling well, their vision's been impacted. They'll probably not use it the way that they normally would on a good day where they're alert, where they're motivated, and feeling good. Krista, can you pass those other papers? Oh, well, here it is right here. How kiddos would use their vision. It can vary from day to day. A couple things that will impact how they're using their vision, we said, is their health, how well they're feeling. The medication that they're on, if that makes them tired, if they're on seizure medication, which a lot of our kids are, that's going to impact how they're using their vision. The degree of stress that they might be experiencing, if it's a new activity that they're doing, if they're in a room where they don't know people, whatever type of stress, if it's a stressful situation, it's going to be harder for them to use their vision. If they have a lack of sleep, and this is one that we've seen with a lot of our kiddos who come in, that if they haven't slept well the night before, they're not going to use their vision very well. We've already talked about how familiar they are with the people, with the objects, with their environment. And like we just said, the accommodations, if they're not in place, all of this is going to impact how our guys use their vision. This applies to a lot of kiddos. Always be sure to look for these different signs of stress and overstimulation. And this isn't just specific for kiddos who have CVI. This kind of goes across the board. If you see a kiddo who might be hiccuping, if you see a little one who gazes at the lights a lot, if they have diarrhea a lot, if they're constantly yawning or have different facial expressions. Hand and finger tension is a really big one. You'll see this in Jaden sometimes. If he ever gets scared, his hands will go like this. His fingers go out, his arms go out. He's under a high stress situation if you see that going on. And closing their eyes or sleeping. This is one that a lot of our kids, people call it playing possum, and I'm sure you guys have seen this where, people might come into work with the kid and you're like, oh, sorry, they're sleeping. But it all just depends. It could be that they are not really sleeping, but maybe they're not being interacted with, or maybe, they just need a chance to close their eyes because they are overstimulated. So just be mindful of that these are all signs that a kiddo might be overstimulated or might be stressed And I'm just gonna mention CDI, like we talked about with those 10 different, the range, 1 to 10, it's a spectrum disability. So just because it impacts one kiddo this way, or we do this accommodation for one kid, it doesn't mean that every other kid who has CVI gets that same accommodation. So just be mindful that when we do accommodate, it's very purposeful and it's very individual for that kiddo. And all of it is based on the CVI assessment that we do. Okay, this is where you guys are gonna look at the handout that Chris had just handed out. We're gonna really fly through this one. These are the visual accommodations for our kiddos. What I tried to do, it's hard to take all 3 of them. It would have been so overwhelming to give you 3 copies of assessments. So I tried to take all 3 of their assessments and all 10 of those different areas and put them into one document. So I color coded it. So you can see anything in blue is going to refer to Jaden, anything in red is going to refer to Johan, and anything in green is going to refer to Stan. Okay, so this is a quick little cheat sheet that you can keep with you if they're in your classroom and you're like, oh, wait a minute, what visual field? You can just look down for the yellow and find visual field and see what their preferred visual field is. Okay, so we're going to take a quick couple minutes and review this together. Any questions so far? Okay. Okay, so the very first one, color preference, what we just discussed. You can see, we already said this, Jaden, he responds to red, blue, and yellow. And like I said, his are not specific to these 3 colors, they're just ones that draw his attention in a little bit more. But he can see every single color. Johan, yellow and red, we already said he responds to a little bit more. And Stan is blue and gold. Like I said, it's really important that we take these colors that they respond to and we try to incorporate it throughout their day. I know it might seem like an overload, but especially for Stan, who's more phase 1, beginning of phase 2, he's going to benefit if everything in his daily routine is in yellow or gold. So we're talking a toothbrush at home. We're talking if you want him to drink out of a cup or you want him to look at the bowl that he's eating out of, have a yellow or a blue one. If you want him to look at a book, maybe make the front of the book blue or use blue puffy paint. Anything blue is going to help him to visually see better. Okay? The next area, need for movement with Jaden. Movement's really just going to be beneficial for him. It's not necessary all the time, but say, you know, you're doing something and he looks away. Adding movement will help to regain his visual attention, so just be mindful of that, especially if it's something a little bit further in the distance. So if it's approximately 4 feet away, you're going to want to add movement to get him to look at things further in the distance. Same thing with Johan. His is going to be a little bit further at 5 feet away. Adding movement is going to help him to be able to see things. Like I said, these guys are really drawn towards movement. You'll notice that Johan loves anything with movement. He loves toys that have wheels to them and he can spin around. He's drawn towards movement, so just be mindful that movement can be a distraction for them as well as helping them to see. With Stan really needs movement. He's going to need a lot of movement. And this can even just be in what we use. So using a pom-pom with him that naturally has movement to it anyways. Or using, we have a little fiber optic toy that we have where if you hit it, it goes back and forth and it lights up and it's blue. So that's why we use that with him to try to build visual responses. Okay? With all 3 of these guys, they're really going to benefit from using a black or a high contrasting background. And this goes across the board for so many different reasons. But if we use say you want them to look at a white piece of paper, using a dark background like this, can everybody see this? Is going to help it pop out a lot more. Versus if I wanted them to look at the white paper on this background, it's a lot harder to see. Oh, thanks. And it's also going to help block out background clutter. So if it is really busy and they have to sit here and look up here, I would try to block out as much with a black background as you can and have what you want them to look at against a high contrast background. And it's important to say high contrast does not always mean black. So if you're using a toy that's dark blue or it's a dark color, using a white background or a lighter color background is going to be really beneficial for them. The most important thing is that it's solid. Okay? We already talked about using anything that's shiny or reflective is going to help them to see. use toys or objects that move easily. That's kind of a given. So that's movement. I'm gonna kind of really, summarize. But please, on your own time, go back and look at these because it's really important. The need for light. Stan is the only one who I would say that light is needed to get him to look at something. Johan can look at a book if you present it and there's no light on it, he'll be fine. Jaden will be fine. But Stan, if you want him to look at something, it needs some type of a light component. So oftentimes we'll use a flashlight with him. Stan's kind of in his own little world by himself where he really needs a controlled environment to use his vision. If we're here in the classroom and these lights are on and kids are in here and there's sounds, it's pretty safe to say that he's not going to use his vision. He's probably going to function a little bit more. I don't want to say blind, but he really needs a lot more support for him to use his vision. So with Stan, what we often do with him is we'll take him under the loft. I've taken him in the bathroom before. We go into classrooms where we totally turn the lights out. And we use some type of a toy that has a light component to it, a movement or shiny, and we're just trying to build those visual responses. He is at the point where he can tolerate just a little bit. Like right now, if we were in here and the lights were kind of dimmed, he might be able to use his vision a little bit. But like I said, in the grand scheme of his school day, he's going to use his auditory sense a lot more than he is his visual sense, and that's okay. It's just that we have to be mindful that in times where we really want a visual response, we really have to set up the environment in a way that's going to help him use his vision. We already talked about be aware of the light source, so just being mindful of where these kiddos are sitting. If the windows are near them, keeping their back to the window will be really beneficial. Sometimes if you want them to look like it's a smartboard, if this is lit up right now, if we turn the lights off in the classroom, it's going to help them look at this a lot more. Okay? That makes sense? When going outside, it's really beneficial for these guys to have sunglasses on or a hat, and that's just because it can be very bright, so just helping to protect their eyes is beneficial. Visual fields. Jaden, when I first started seeing him, he had a strong right visual field. So I put right in here so you guys can have that. But I'll tell you that most times he's very responsive in his right and his left. On days where we talked about if he hasn't slept well the night before, if he's tired, if he's not feeling well, he might be more responsive to his right field. So just keep that in mind. You might present things to his right and then slowly move it towards central. Okay? But this, again, does not mean that he only can see in his right field. It just means to get his response, we might need to start in the right field and then move it around a bit. With Jaden, he has a left field preference. I mean, with Johan, I'm sorry. His is a little bit more left. But again, with Johan, he can see in his right, so on days where he's tired or not feeling well, that's where you're going to have to remember this a little bit more. Stan, we mentioned this before, his right field used to be his strongest field. He would only respond to things that were in his right field. He's now starting to respond to things in his left field a little bit more. Still a little bit more to his right, but his left is definitely getting strong. If you present things right here in the center, he's probably not going to be able to see it. His right and left are his biggest field. Okay? Using a slant board is really beneficial. So kind of like that little thing that brings things a little bit closer up to eye level. Both the classrooms have been great. They have ones that have a white background, ones that have a black background. But if things are here in your lower field, especially for our guys who might have a hard time controlling their head, looking down is going to take a lot of effort. So the more that we can just bring things closer to eye level for them, the easier it's going to be for them to use their vision. And I just want to mention too, when you see Johan and when you see Jaden, it looks like they use their vision pretty a good bit, and they do. But just be mindful that it's still very hard for them to use their vision. So like Jazz was saying, towards the end of the day, when they start pulling off their glasses, when they start rubbing their eyes, understand that they're going to be visually fatigued and they're going to be exhausted by the end of the day. So just be mindful. That's another reason that we do give them visual breaks and take their glasses off, or do activities that just don't require to use their vision as much, more fun things for them. You know, just giving them breaks throughout their day where they're not having to work as hard visually. The next area is visual complexity. And this, I lumped Jaden and Johan together because they're very similar in what they do. With these guys, use toys with no more than 2 or 3 bright colors. Which is hard because most toys, when it comes to kiddos, are very multiple pattern, very complex, a lot of different colors. And you'll see with Jaden and with Johan, because they have their preferred toys, like Jaden has a toy that he plays with, we call it the treehouse toy, where it's probably 17 different colors, there's different patterns on it, there's different words on it, it's lighting up, and he can look at it just fine. So it seems like it's very complex, but that has been his favorite toy since he was born. So he's had a long time to get used to it. But 9 times out of 10, you brought in something that's brand new and it has that many colors and that many patterns, they're gonna have a really hard time seeing it. Okay? Only present 1 to 2 items at a time. This can go on their tray if you're thinking about on their tray, or if they're on the floor, if you're thinking about what's around them, try not to let it be too busy. If they might have a toy, then they might have their slant board over here, then they might have a paper over here. The more objects that are around them that you want them, that are around them, the harder it's going to be for them to see that one specific thing that you want them to see. Does that make sense? Slowly increase the number of objects. So if you do say you do need them to look at these 3 things that are in front of them, make sure all 3 of them are not really, really busy. So maybe, 2 of them can be single colored and then the 3rd object has maybe 2 colors to it. So just be mindful, the more colors and the more objects, the harder it is going to be for them to see. I'm not going to go into all of these. With Jaden and with Johan, we are using photographs with them. We're not using photos for everything within their day. We're at the process now where we're looking to see, do they understand photos? And just because they understand one photo doesn't mean that they understand every single photo that you ever take. With these little ones, we drill photos into them and we start with the things that are most preferred to them, things that they most see within their daily routines, and then we test them to see if they understand these photos. So with both of them right now, we are working on photos, but I wouldn't say that's an automatically safe way to communicate with them. We already kind of talked about most of this. Limit social and communication interactions until they've been able to focus on the object. This one really impacts Stan. If you're working with Stan, don't talk to him while he's trying to look at something. He has very, very good hearing, and he tunes in to whatever sounds he's hearing. So that means if you're over on that side of the room and you're trying to get a visual response and kids are over here talking, he's probably going to be hearing that, and he will shut off his vision so he can listen. It's too hard for him to look and listen at the same time. So just be mindful that if there's a lot of sounds going on, it's going to be trickier for these guys to use their vision. Visual latency. It goes pretty much across the board. All these little guys need wait time to respond. Don't, like I said, don't feel like you need to rush through things. Like a lot of times in morning meeting and circle time, we're real quick to show a book around to everybody. These little ones might need the book presented, held it there for a couple seconds, wait for them to look. You'll see their visual responses. But I just know in the natural scheme of kindergarten classrooms, things happen fast, which unfortunately for our guys is the worst. They need wait time. So just be mindful of that. Difficulties with distance viewing. Jaden, like we said, 8 to 12 inches of his face is best. His glasses will help. Johan, we've talked about 10 to 12 inches. And Stan needs things a little bit closer to him. If you're doing things up here on the smartboard, it might be a really good idea if you can either provide a paper copy of what you're doing up there or even objects related to what you're doing. So if you're doing a story, bringing that real life object, as real life as it should be. If you're doing a story about the fall and apples and whatnot, and you can bring those real life objects that the kids can touch and hold and feel, the better it's going to be. Okay? If you are going to start, for visual novelty, the newness of things, if you are going to start introducing new things, which of course you will because that's what our curriculums entail, try to have those new things bring the same characteristics as the old ones. So what that means is if, like we talked about with Stan, if he sees the color blue. If you're bringing in something new, that's okay, but try to add the color blue to it. Or if you're bringing in something new, try to add a shiny component to it. Whatever they have of those things that they do look at, try to look at, well, why do they look at it? Is it shiny? Is it this color? Does it move? Well, what about that can we carry over to the new thing that we're doing? Does that make sense? Visually guided reach. This is just a hard one with our kiddos. The biggest thing I could say for our kids is supportive seating, especially for Stan. He needs to be supported if he's going to use his vision. When he's working on PT skills and he's trying to sit on the floor, you know, crisscross applesauce and lean forward on his hands, and his body is physically working so hard, this is not going to be a good time where he's going to use his vision. And like I said, that's okay. We don't always have to work on every single thing at the same time. PT goals are important, but just be mindful that the more physical support they have, the easier it's going to be for them to use their vision. So that's very critical. That's all the further I'm going to go into this one. Any questions on this handout? Karen?
So like samples are good. Do we have samples to put in special classes that we can have? Do we have some, you know what I mean? Like, do we have any of those things that help these kids that the special teachers could have in our classroom to?
We do have a couple in our office. I'm not sure how many we have, but we probably wouldn't be able to give one to every special. Either they could maybe do it from the classroom, we could share, or the school could actually order some. It might be, I know when a lot of our kids were down in Debbie Boss's classroom, she ordered like 6 slam boards, so every single person had it. So in the meantime, you can borrow whatever we have, and then maybe ordering will be.
Yeah, that's a court order.
I'll bring it.
A thick binder might work as well, like a 5-inch binder
Yes.
on the side.
Yeah. One of those big 3-ring binders with the business. Great idea.
What, I'm sorry.
Just a quick note, in Karen's question about supplies. So we get asked that question a lot across the state. So you guys would be giving us that, right? And it's like, no, the deafblind program has no budget. We actually siphon off a DSD, so even if you ask us to buy something for you, it's really coming out of your budget anyways. Just so you know, we have no means of collecting supplies, and the supplies that we have are to help test and figure out what works best for the kids, to then make recommendations on the supplies.
Thank you. Okay. We're going to skip through this. This is kind of where Stan is, using things that, like I said, that have a movement property to it, that have a shiny property to it, that are just single color. This is kind of what he's going to be visually looking at. Again, slinkies are great to use with our kiddos just because they have that movement, they have the shiny. We'll skip through these. I just kind of gave you guys a couple of examples. This is just visually. When kids are more in phase 2, these are the type of books they might be able to look at. Things that are very simple, that just have one object per page. You notice some of the toys are starting to have 2 or 3 colors to them, but when they're in phase 2, they're going to start being able to look at this type of stuff. Phase 3 is where they're going to start using their vision, and they can handle things that are multicolored, that are 2-dimensional, that don't have a light-up component. You know, if you know Pete the Cat books, I mean, they're colorful, but they're also very busy on the inside. There's a lot of colors, there's a lot of words. So these are things that you're going to want to start doing a little bit later on when they're in phase 3. And while these also look like very simple toys, this piggy bank and the star stacker toy here, look at how many colors are on there. Look at what they're going to have to do. They're going to have to look at the toy and put the ring on top, which, you know, when we think about normally preschool, it's not that big of a thing. But visually, combining looking and then trying to reach and do that at the same time, it's going to be a harder toy for some of our kids with CVI to play with. Okay. Again, this is oftentimes what it looks like when we're trying to get our kids to look at something and there's a busy background. So this is just a visual. When you guys want to read over this on your own time, these are just a couple different accommodations that you can use with our kiddos. We mentioned a good fair amount of them, but I did want to hit on laminating. This is something that we naturally do because it's easier and it helps to preserve our materials that we have. But keep in mind that the glare that sometimes comes off of laminating things is going to be distracting for our kids. So you might think, oh, they're looking at it, they like it, it's laminated. What they're seeing is the shininess of it, and they're probably missing what's on the paper. So I know it's not great for our materials because then we tend to have to make them more and more. But if you did already laminate things, just be mindful that if they're flat on the tray or flat on the floor, the light's going to directly reflect off of it. If you do put it on a slant board or you have it a little bit more at eye level, it's not going to be as shiny. So just look for it. If you guys want to use iPad apps, these are some great apps that really work on eye-hand coordination, work on a couple different things. Some of them are specifically designed for kids who have CVI, some are not, but they're just good to work on different skills. So I just broke it down into the 3 different phases, so if you're interested in any of them, they'll be good for you. All right. Everybody paying attention? Maybe we can just take a quick 3-minute break if you want to stand up, go to the bathroom real quick, and then we're going to come back for the second part, and then we'll wrap it up.
Oh boy.
You put down the Biden. You do, but yeah, it's still a big debate, yeah. Doesn't jam, right? They don't,
Trying to interact. We're taking a break.
That's why she came in.
Is that Joe? I saw people like moving chairs. I was like, oh, yeah, come on, people. You can't stay in one chair for like an hour. I don't know how old you are.
Well, you're not close. Swimming.
They were $3 and they. I've done well, I do it. Do you know what I mean? Wednesday through Saturday, but they can sold out. Just like my Amish stand. Plus like, yeah. Oh, you're gonna do stand.
Good, yeah, thank you. Although that one time I was like, oh, no. I can't even remember.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you guys for bearing with me. I know this is a long presentation and it's a lot of information, but I really just wanted to give you all this information and, you know, chew whatever, mull whatever, and then as the school year goes on, we'll be here, we'll support you, but I just wanted to make sure that you kind of had as much as you could in the beginning. So now we're going to go kind of individual real quick, and we're going to touch on, Stan is our first little guy that we're going to talk about. If you haven't met him yet, because his attendance might get a little sketchy, this is who he is and what he looks like. Stan, yeah. Okay, so what I'm going to do, for each kiddo is I'm just going to review their hearing a little bit. We're going to talk about how to accommodate for their hearing, and we're briefly going to touch on communication for each one of them, okay? So as far as Stan's hearing, he has great hearing. He has what is called auditory neuropathy, and you guys can read about this on your own time, but basically it's where sounds go in our ear and they get lost somewhere, and they don't go from the inner ear to the brain. So it's very similar with CVI, where your ears are hearing, but then your brain isn't quite processing what you're hearing. So it can be, it's a range, again, it can go from all the way from mild to severe, and it can impact you day by day. So if you're not feeling well, again, if you didn't sleep well the night before, you might see changes in these little ones and how they use their vision, or how they use their hearing, sorry. A lot of times they have a hard time hearing the difference of different sounds. So just be mindful sometimes, the speech clarity is what kids with auditory neuropathy have a hard time with. It's clarity. Speech tends to be unclear or distorted. Oftentimes it can be, I've heard it described as like white noise or like almost staticky, so they can kind of hear sounds coming in. They might even be able to hear how loud they are and how soft they are, but they're not able to hear the clarity of what they're hearing. Now with Stan specifically, I can't tell you how I've seen auditory neuropathy really impact him. He uses his hearing very well. I would tell you that this is his primary sensory channel. This is how we communicate with him. This is how we pretty much do everything with sounds with Stan. There are days, and there's been one hearing test that he had that I went with him to his family, and his audiologist wasn't sure if he was hearing the difference between like na and pa or something like that. So just be mindful that as we're talking to him, there of course is going to be some understanding issues, but he's very motivated by sounds, and we talk a lot to him. We use sounds to get his attention. He's also a little guy, because his vision is what it is, and he doesn't use his vision very well. You can almost imagine it's like he's blind. So sound brings him comfort. So oftentimes we'll talk to him about where he is, what's happening around him, what kids are doing what. He's a guy who will startle to different sounds, so we always try to put meaning to sounds for him. So if you do notice that he startles to something or he starts looking a little unsure, we always provide that language of what he's hearing, if that makes sense. We're going to go over just a couple of his accommodations. And again, these are probably every accommodation that we can think of, and I know that they're impossible to do all day, every day in your classroom. So if you can just pick and choose a couple of them, you know, it's going to help him to best use his auditory sense. Reduce and limit background noise. Just be mindful, and this is pretty across the board with all three of our little guys, that if, say, kids are over here playing with a toy and there's toys that are making a lot of sounds, that you're trying to talk to a Stan right here, that he might have a hard time hearing your voice if there's a lot of noise going on around you. Same thing, you know, if you think about at home where the air conditioning unit is, or if the door is propped open and a class is going through the hallway, or in the gym where it's very echoey, all those sounds. Just be mindful that what you want him to listen to might be harder the louder it is. We mentioned this when interacting, give Stan time to process the sounds that he's hearing, and the language for what he hears. We just talked about that. Actually, we kind of already touched on all of these as far as accommodations. Stan is one, like I said, because he doesn't use his vision that well, just to be mindful of kind of giving him that information. So sometimes you'll notice that he gets a little bit like, he'll breathe heavier, and he gets nervous when he's by himself, when he doesn't hear anything going on around him, and when he is alone. It's basically, if you can imagine, if you're blind and you're sitting here and you hear nothing, you have no idea what's happening around you. So we always try to give him that auditory input of, oh, Stan, I have to walk to the other side of the room real quick, you know, just give me a second. Always kind of talk him through what's going on. And if you can't talk, that's okay. Even just putting a hand on him, letting him know that you're there or somebody's there with him. Touch is a really big thing for him as well, because that's how he explores and knows who's around him. Okay. I mentioned earlier that a couple of the different assessments that we do, one of them is called the sensory channel inventory. And for you guys who we've worked with before, you notice when we come in and we say, do you mind if we observe? We're not watching you, we're watching the kiddo. We're doing a sensory channel inventory. And what we do is we observe them in the activity that they're doing, and we're trying to look at all their different senses, their vision, their hearing, their touch, their movements, and we're trying to figure out how do they access the world around them? How do they access information? So when you see primary and secondary, this is referring to how he best receives information and understands the world around him. So for Stan, like we mentioned, his hearing is really big to him. He uses his hearing. His second is movement. Stan's not a little guy that walks, but he does use his arms, you know, and has different movements. He loves to be in the walker and walk around. Movement is very motivating for him, and it helps him to learn. So the more that you can provide hearing, and the more you can provide access for him to move throughout his day, the more he's going to be engaged to learn. If you guys look at the handout that you have, the touch and the sound and the object cues, it's the blue one that looks like this. We can go over it on your own time, but as I mentioned, I said that hearing is his primary sensory channel. So we take that into consideration of how we communicate with him. So with Stan, it wouldn't make sense to use a picture with him and show him a picture and say, we're getting ready to go to gym, because vision is not his primary sensory channel. Hearing is. So when we think about how we're communicating with him, we present things through sound is a really big one. So we have touch cues that we do with him. And as you can see, what we do this with all the deafblind kids. So if you have a kiddo, we're going to work on this together. We look at their daily routine and we figure out what activities happen most in their day. And then what activities are they most motivated by. And then we start with those activities to create touch cues for, and sound cues and object cues. So a touch cue is something that you do on the kiddo. You do it on their body. So with Stan, for example, whenever he's getting ready to go to the bathroom and get his diaper changed, the touch cue that we do on him is right where the sticky area of his diaper is. We tap him 2 times, and we say, and then you look at the sound cue and we say, it's time to change your diaper. So that way, if Stan, pretty much anytime he feels 2 taps on his hip, he knows where he's going. For our little ones, it's imperative that we don't just pick them up and take them and do for them. The more active they can be in their day, the better. The more cueing that we can give them, the more warning to let them know that something is about to happen, the more it prepares them, and the less their body's going to be in a state of stress. Because you can imagine if someone just picks you up and takes you somewhere, and then drops you down over here, and brings a toy here, you never really know what's happening and what's expected. So the more that we can talk them through what we're doing, whether it's through sign, whether it's through talking to them, whether it's through showing them an object, they know what that object represents, the more they're going to be able to be an active participant. I just want to touch on this. It mentions it later, but I just want to give an example. Joe, if you don't mind. This is kind of what it would be like. Just, you can sit. Okay, so that's what we just did. So, Joe, when I first took your hand up, what did you do? Did you try to, like, anticipate what I was going to do, where I was going to...
I wasn't sure what you were going to do.
Okay. So this is an example of what happens all the time. We want to take our kids' hands, we want to put it on this toy, we want them to explore this texture, and what we naturally think is, well, if I don't move their hand, they're not going to know it's there, they're not going to do it, right? So, then this is probably what happened with you, Joe. As I took your hand and started moving, you were trying to move it and anticipate what was going on. But after I kept moving your hand and doing things, you probably just gave up and let me just move your hand, right? So what happens is this happens to our kids. Once they can actively do something on their own, if they reach, if they can move, if they're an active participant in what's going on, their brain activates, and that's when learning happens. If they are passive in what's going on and we're taking and doing everything for them and they're basically just participating in what's going on, their brain is not engaged. There will be no learning happening at all. So the second you get them to make a movement on their own, the second you get them to, reach out for something, turn and look at something, alert to a sound, when they're actively doing something, that's when learning is happening. So the more they can do, the better. Doreen?
You were saying that the 3 students that you're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of them rely on their hearing.
Uh-huh.
Why can't you say that you're moving their hand to touch something instead
You
of just
can.
moving it?
Yeah, I think that's perfect. You can. And what I want, we'll talk about this later, but I'm just going to jump ahead. Hand underhand is a big thing that we talk about. You guys know we preach it across the board. Most times you hear hand overhand, in their IEPs, people will say, we need to use hand overhand to get them to do something. And that's basically where the adult is taking the child's hand and doing it for them. It's called hand overhand. But in the world of deaf blindness, because our little ones don't have as much access to their vision, don't have as much access to their hearing, we use what's called hand underhand. So basically, the adult is taking their hand and they're going under the kiddo. So the kiddo isn't really doing much. And then the adult can explore the toy, they can activate the toy, they can write and scribble on a piece of paper. And once the kid feels comfortable or then knows what's expected, they can slide their hand off and then they can do whatever they want. But just be mindful. I once heard someone explain it to me. They said, how would you feel if I just came up to you and just poked you in the eye? Well, of course, to us it's like, no, of course I don't want you to poke me in the eye. Because that's how we visually access the world. This is my primary sensory channel. So that's very invasive if somebody would come do that. For our little ones who don't see and don't hear as much, their hands are really how they access the world. So when you take their hand and force them to do something, this is why 9 times out of 10 you see this happen with a lot of our kids. They pull back because they have such negative experiences with touch. So the more respectful we can be to them and kind of let them move, by us doing hand under hand, they're learning a lot. They're feeling, how do I activate something? What is this object? What is this material? They're learning concepts about speed, how fast you're going. They're learning all different concepts, even though they're not actively participating. But the second you move and then they can participate, that's when learning is going to happen. So I think modeling to them and moving their hand and showing them, but I think doing it at a pace that's slow and respectful to them is really the most important thing. Did that kind of answer your question, Dory? Jack?
So the example you gave about cues with the diaper,
Mm-hmm.
like if somebody unexpectedly tapped my pelvis and then said, I'm changing your diaper, like would you say that and cue at the same time, or would you say that first, I'm gonna change your diaper before you?
For
tap
Stan,
them?
because he accesses his hearing so much, I would probably talk it through him first and say, Stan, we're gonna get ready to change your diaper. Remember, we're changing your diaper, and then tap him.
I don't know, order.
I wouldn't say. I think consistency is the important thing. So everybody knows when Stan goes to get his diaper changed, he's getting 2 taps on the right side of his hip, and that's specific to Stan. We have on the other kiddos, on Johan and Jaden, they have some objects. Well, yeah, Stan does too. Some objects that cue them of where they're getting ready to go. And on the back of the symbol, we have the words, the sound cue typed out. So that way, anybody who picks up that orange ball knows it's time to go to the little gym, and they can look at the back of it and say, oh, Stan, it's time to go to the little gym. You can read directly off of it. So that way, we're all using the same language and the same words. Yeah? Okay. So if you guys don't mind on your own time, just check this out for Stan and know that these were chosen with a purpose. When you look at object cues, I just want to mention that you have to think about it from the kiddo's point of view and what they're experiencing. So, like for example, going to the OT or the PT room, we might think, who knows what you might think for the OT PT room? How would you, any volunteers think about, if you were going to the OT and PT room, what would be a symbol that you might think to kind of cue the kid to say, okay, we're going to go to OT room. Jazz?
Picture of the staff.
Okay, so Jazz says a picture of the staff. Okay. Anybody? A swing. So in a ball. Okay. A rope. Yeah.
He's saying,
Yeah.
because
Okay.
they have that over there in the small gym.
So think about, we'll say rope for instance. Rope. When Stan goes to the OT or PT room, does he do anything on a swing there? When he goes to the OT or PT room, can he see a picture of and I'm just giving this for an example. You have to think specifically from him. So when Stan is in OT, what does he do? What does he experience? So when we created these object cues, we went to Amy and we went to Lisa and we said, when they're in here, what does he do? And he rolls on a bumpy ball. They put him on his back, on his stomach, I'm not sure what he does in there, but he rolls on it and he feels this bumpy ball. So for his object cue, we have half of a bumpy ball. So to anybody who looked at this, it probably would make no sense to us because we have no idea what a bumpy ball represents. But to Stan, he does a bumpy ball when he's down in that PT and OT room, where he doesn't do it anywhere else. So to him, he knows, oh, this is going to represent where I'm getting ready to go. Okay? So just be mindful that when you're thinking about cues for the kids, don't think you have to do one for every single part of their day. It's important for them to develop, we call it one-to-one correspondence, but we want him to know that this object or this photo represents this activity. And sometimes it just might take a long time to pair those two together before they understand the concept. So we don't have one for the boys for all activities throughout their day. We're starting slow, and as we see that they're understanding, we're adding on little by little. Okay? So, you'll also see, you'll have this for all three of the boys. We have their touch cues, all their cues that they use. The second page you have right here is an example of their daily schedule. This is what they did last year, so it's going to look way different than what their schedule is this year, but it just gives you an example of when they were in their different equipment, when they took different breaks. Anything you see highlighted in blue is when they had a therapy. Anything, and this, hopefully I'll do this with all of them in their new routines, but you can see anything here in red is an opportunity throughout their day to use those touch cues and sound cues. Because I think sometimes when we look at communication, we think, oh, I have a diaper, I can use it when he goes to the bathroom. Oh, that's one time during the day or 2 times. But if you look at the list of cues that we have, and then you look at his schedule, you'll be able to see all these areas in red are times during the day that we have to communicate with him about what's going on and what's going to be happening next. Okay? And then on the last page I think that you guys have with this one is their preference inventory. This looks, on one page is all of their likes, and on the last page is all of their dislikes. And this is so important for communication. When you're thinking about why they're going to want to communicate, they're either going to want to communicate about things they really, really like or things they really don't like. So we try to update this every year. So hopefully in the beginning of this school year, we're going to update it again with them and look at what's motivating to them and what they don't like. Okay? So you have these handouts on all 3 of the kiddos. So hopefully that'll provide some information. I'm not going to get into their IEP goals, but these are in here. And I just wanted to put these in here so you guys kind of have a general idea of what we're working on communication-wise. So I'll work with the classroom teachers on this together, but this is just for your info. And this is Johan. Oh, sorry. So with Johan, I just want to touch on his hearing real quick. And it's actually, and it's changed a little bit since putting this together. But Johan's right ear is his better ear. He hears best out of his right ear. His left ear has a moderate to severe hearing loss. And he does have hearing aids. He now has hearing aids for both of his ears. On here, it just says that he has his left ear, but as of the beginning of the school year, he got one for his right ear. So, but just so you know, his right ear is his better ear. It's really important for him to wear his hearing aids, and he does a pretty good job with his hearing aids on and leaving them on, but I'm sure a lot of you guys know what audiograms look at and what hearing losses are. But where he's at on his left ear with a moderate to severe hearing loss, if he doesn't have his hearing aid in, he's probably missing all speech sounds, pretty much. Unless you are right there and you're talking really loudly to him, he's not going to hear a good chunk of what you're presenting to him. So if he can have his hearing aids in, he's going to have access to so many more sounds, so much more speech and clarity. He has tubes, just like all of our little ones pretty much have tubes, which are PE, it's pressure equalizing tubes that surgically get put into our ears. Johan has them and Jaden, they both have them because they have constant fluid in their ears and constant ear infections. So just be mindful that if you just notice a day where he might be rubbing his ear, there's a good chance he could have an ear infection or he might not be hearing that well. So they have tubes in their ears. A lot of these we kind of already mentioned before, so the only one, make sure with his their hearing aids that you're doing daily battery checks just to make sure that the batteries are working. With both of these guys, Jaden and Johan, who have hearing aids, when you open up the battery door, that turns their hearing aids off. When you push the battery door closed, that turns them on. So if you're ever taking them out for a break, or if they happen to fall asleep, please open up that battery door because otherwise it's just going to be draining the battery and they're going to die a lot faster. And then also do checks on them. So whenever you push that little door closed, wait between like 3 and 5 seconds, and if you can cup your hand around it and listen to see if you hear that squealing, that feedback sound, 9 times out of 10 that means they're good and they're on and they're working. Both of them have volume controls on their hearing aids, but they've all been disabled. So if you happen to bump it or you click something, it's okay. It's not broken, you didn't tweak the volume. Once they're on, they're pretty much set at one frequency. With Johann, his primary sensory channel is his vision. Like I said, it looks like they use their vision very well, and he accesses his world really through his vision. So that's why, if you look, Chris is getting ready to pass out Johann's touch cues, sound cues. If you look at those, he has more visual cues. He has some objects as well as some photographs, because like I said, we're just starting to experiment, and there are some photographs that he understands. I should also mention too that photographs are really the best for these little guys. And I say the difference between photographs and pictures. Pictures are what I think more so when you look at these pictures right here, more cartoon-like pictures. If you think of, some of you guys have probably used Board Maker, which are kind of like the little, what's the word? Yeah, clip art. So it's not a real-life picture of something. For our little ones, the more abstract it is like this, the harder it's going to be for them to understand. Does that make sense? So if you can take real life pictures of what they experience during the day, you know, that's going to be best. They will have an easier time understanding that visually than they would more abstract pictures. Make sense? Again, so you can see Johann, you can see his touch, sound, visual cues, and you can see his preference inventory is also there. Just to kind of get you, you know, if you're teaching a special and you think, well, like, what can I do with this kid, or what motivates him? That's why we have the preference inventories. And I would love, it's so important to have teaming with these guys, because what you see in your class is going to be way different than, you know, what might happen in art. So sharing preference inventories, and I'm hoping to get one on every kiddo and get everybody's input, because we'll all see such different things on what's motivating to them.
Do you have any extras of those? I didn't get one.
Oh, here, I'm sorry.
And this is Jaden's leather. With Jaden, again, he has both hearing aids. He has a bilateral moderate to severe hearing loss. Jaden is one who gets ear infections all the time. You'll see a lot of times when he has his hearing aids in, he is constantly rubbing his right ear all the time. He's trying to pull his ear mold out, he's rubbing at it, he's pushing it. So just be mindful that a lot of times he does have a lot of ear infections. He also has what's called eustachian tube dysfunction, and this is the part of our ear, basically it opens and closes, and his does not open and close. So a lot of times things sound really muffled to him. So just be mindful that he has that. The abnormal peripheral auditory function, don't worry about that. That's just related to his eustachian tube dysfunction. Well, we can talk about it later. But he also has hearing aids, and then he also has tubes in his ears. There's a good chance that Jaden might be getting a Baha. You guys know what Bahas are. Instead of the hearing aids and ear molds, it's called a behind the ear, or no, a bone anchored hearing aid. So with that one, that's the one that tends to look like a headband that they have, and it goes.
So he will be getting that
There's
kind
a
of
big-
casting?
Yeah, but it's kind of in the process. They were talking about getting it last spring, so it's in the process of going through insurance and whatnot. Because basically what's happening is he's having so many ear infections that sound isn't properly getting from his outer ear to his inner ear to be processed. So they're hoping if they totally bypass his ear, they're gonna put, you guys know what it looks like, and it goes behind on a bone, and then it's gonna vibrate the bone, so they totally bypass the ear, and he'll be able to hear through that better than he would with his hearing aids. So it's just something to be looking forward to, that it might be coming. His are pretty much very similar, so I'm not gonna go into all of his hearing accommodations. Again, his sensory channel is vision, so him and Johann are very similar in the way that they use the vision, except with Jaden, his secondary sensory channel is his touch. He really uses his hands. He loves to explore different textures. This is a really big motivator for him. If he's sitting on the floor, he'll explore the carpet. If he's on a cube seat, he'll rub the side of the cube seat. If you're doing sensory play, any type of rice and sand, he loves to get his hands in there. So just be mindful that Jaden's hands are really a big way that he explores different things. And again, Chris is passing out everything for Jaden. And if we run out of anything, I can email all of this to you guys too, so you have it. But his preference inventory and his cues are there, so just keep those in mind. These are the last couple things I want to touch on, are just some basic deafblind best practices. We've already talked about the importance of keeping a consistent routine. This is really important for our little ones. The more routine and the more they're able to expect what's going to be happening next, what's going to be happening throughout their day, even the next day, is really, really important. And by implementing their cues so they can anticipate what's going to happen is going to be really important for them. This also goes to lessons, and I know that this is so hard in elementary school now, or now that they're in kindergarten, but the more repetition you guys can do, the better. So if you're doing a certain lesson, I know most times things tend to switch from day to day to day, but if you can spend a week on a book or on a lesson to really get that concept for them, the more time that you spend, the better with them. So unfortunately, when it switches up every single day, that's not great for them building those concepts on things. So the more you can spend on it, the better. Explain and model what's expected of them. So again, taking your time with them. If there's ever going to be an activity that you're doing, a craft that you're doing, something that you're putting together, if you can have that finished product right there to show them what it's going to look like when they get done, that would be great for them. And even modeling what's expected, even if it's you're trying to get them to do a back and forth behavior, bringing a peer up with them. I mean, peers are so wonderful for our kids to be able to see what something really looks like, what they should be doing. So if you can even pair them, if you're doing activities and you can pair a peer with one of our little ones, that's wonderful. And a lot of our kids are motivated. Stan loves to hear his peers' voices. That's a huge thing for him. Jaden and Johan both really use their vision, so when they can see a peer coming up to them to interact, the more you can do that, that would be awesome. We've kind of really stressed warm-up time, wait time. I put wait time and processing time because part of it is vision. Sometimes they might visually need wait time to be able to see something. And processing time, I think more about your brain. Sometimes I think they might know what they want to do, but by the time they realize what they want to do, they have to think about how they're going to do it, how they're going to get their body to do it, and then actually do it. It takes a long time sometimes. So to us, waiting 5 seconds might seem like, oh my gosh, come on, I gotta go. But if you can just be strategic and really count, even up to 15, count it out loud to yourself and wait at least 15 seconds for them before you jump and say, oh, they're not gonna do it. So just try to be patient with them. We've talked about active participation and how important that is. Set up an environment that they have access to and is responsive to them. This, basically, all I want it to be responsive to them. So if they're making a noise, respond to that noise. If they're lifting up an arm, honor that and say, oh, I see you lifting up your arm. The more that we can put meaning to what they're doing, the more it's going to be done. But if you can imagine, if they're kind of just sitting there and they're lifting an arm up and down, and nobody ever acknowledges it, they're going to stop doing it because it's not getting a response. So the more that we can acknowledge anything that they're doing, the more it's going to help them to do that more and more. Okay. We already talked about hand under hand. Mutual tactile attention. I just wanted to touch on this a little bit. This is what we call joint attention. When two kids playing with a toy, they're both playing with it together, they're both engaged. With our little ones, oftentimes, primarily when you think about Stan, he doesn't have a concept. If something isn't directly in his area that he can touch, he probably doesn't have a concept of what's going on around him. So touch is really vital for him. So if you put a toy in front of Stan, we do what's called mutual touch. So if he, say, I don't know, I'm thinking about his beads. He has some hanging beads that he plays with from time to time. If they're right in front of him and he's not doing anything, what I might do is come up beside him and put my hand right here. I'm not putting it over, I'm not going under. I'm just right beside him so he can feel me, and then I'm exploring with whatever the toy is, or I'm activating the toy. But basically we're doing it together, and that's communicating to him, hey, I see you, and I see what you're doing, and I want to play too. So the more that you can do things through touch mutually together, the better. And I do this with Johan, I do this with Jaden too, you know, especially for things that are new to them. If you have a new toy, or you have a new, you know, if you want them to finger paint and you put a blob of paint in front of them and they don't do anything, I'd be the first one to get right in there and take, you know, or even have my own paper right beside them, and then I'm going to show them, this is what we're doing, we're finger painting, and then see if they look. And if they don't, I might get right there on their paper and start exploring it with them. But sometimes they think they don't have experiences. You know, we have what's called incidental learning, where I can use my vision. I can see, you know, what Katie's doing back there, and I know, oh, you know, what, I don't know, for example, when I get tired, I lean over and I put my hand here on my face. And that's what I do because I can see her in the distance. But our kids don't have that. So that's why sometimes our kids have these odd behaviors. You know, they might, you know, start doing this. They don't know when they're tired what's really appropriate to do is to sit down and put their head on their desk, because they haven't ever seen other people do that. So their behaviors look a lot different, but they all serve a purpose. So my big hope that you get too is that when you see them doing something, don't jump to the fact and think, that's a behavior, I don't like what they're doing, or think it might be a behavior. We always try to look for a purpose in what they're doing. And 9 times out of 10 there is a purpose. It's just up to us to try to figure out why are they doing that. I think that's the end. So, 2 things. I want to know if anybody has any questions. If it's too late, feel free to email them to me as we go along. And I have to do an evaluation. So if I can pass it out to you, if you guys want to do it, it's a quick couple questions on a scale of 1 to 5. You can fill that out, or you can leave it on my desk or Karen's desk. But, are there any questions? Doreen?
I thought you were going to talk a little bit on Polly.
Oh, I wasn't talking about Paul. The part that I wanted to talk about with Polly was that he also has cortical visual impairment. But he's on the far end. He's on the phase 3 end of things. So, but Brenda will be able to help you a lot. She has his most recent CVI, and she'll be able to explain how those 10 different characteristics impact him. But Polly, you can see, who's looking at faces, he looks at pictures, he does a lot visually. But he's going to be able to keep in mind is that when he's tired and not feeling well, he's going to need a lot more support to visually be able to see things. So this was kind of like a Deafblind 101 and really focused on those 3 kiddos, but I know Brenda's getting ready to do a PLC on Polly with his team. So, what do I do here? Any other questions?
Maybe this one.